Don't worry about me. I'm going where I always wanted to go, and when I get there, I'll be saying a prayer for all of you.
These were the last words that Father Kapaun spoke to his men. These were the words that those men left that prison camp in Korea and brought back to the United States. These words have served as a source of hope for people for many years. Before I talk about today's virtue, I want to take a second to look back. I want to look back at some of the things that you've done already and that we've challenged you to do as part of this journey. We started the journey by first saying, who is Father Kapaun and is he worthy of you journeying with? And I think by now the answer is yes. Secondly, we invited you to be and to take on the idea that you could become one of Kapaun's men. And each week I challenged you in a different way. The first week I said to you, begin the process of 3 Hail Marys in the morning and 3 Hail Marys each night. And in that process, you were beginning the idea of a rhythm of daily prayer. Secondly, we asked you to go to reconciliation and to make right with God so that God could use you to make right with the people around you. And as you know, if you took that, you know how it felt to hear the words of the priest, that it's okay, that your sins have been forgiven by God. And in fact, He's even forgotten. I remember St. Paul of the Cross once saying, our sins are like a small piece of cotton thrown into a raging fire, and the fire is God's love. The third thing I challenged you to do was to find one man in this group that you could share your faith journey with and your struggles with, and that could enter your journey not so much as from a place of judgment, but a place of journey. A place where he could join you and pray for you and intercede for you on a daily basis. And I pray he has done this since this journey started. Today we talk about the great virtue of hope. And anyone who's ever read the story of Father Kapaun knows that he lived that virtue daily. For us as men, that's a virtue that's very lost in the world we live in. Most people would say the more news you watch, the more people you talk to, that our situation is hopeless. But if you're going to be a Kapaun's man, you understand that we are called to bring hope to every situation we enter. Whether it's our homes that are under attack constantly by worldly things, whether it's our business, which sometimes we feel very called to make tough decisions, whether it's our churches, which many times are under attack from the world, or possibly whether it's just the world at large. We are called as Kapaun's men to bring hope to each situation we enter. And some questions that came to me as I prayed about this virtue was, if you went to my family, would my family say, Joe Ferris is a person of hope? Joe Ferris is a person who brings people hope in even the toughest of times. If you went to my boss, would my boss say to you, yeah, Joe Ferris is the guy we go to when we need somebody to bring hope to what appears to be a hopeless situation? If you went to my pastor, would he say tough times in the parish require tough people like Joe Ferris who brings hope? Would you go to my community and say this is a man who, as he enters his home, his neighbors know he brings hope to everything around him? And I have to confess to you, the more I prayed into this journey with Father Kapaun, the more I realized the answer wasn't always yes. I could bring hope during the easy times. I could bring hope when everything was perfect and happy. But I struggled bringing hope when things didn't go the way I wanted them to go. And so this week, as we see the journey of Father Kapaun open up, and as we look through the lens of our lives, we ask ourselves over and over again, am I that person? And if we're not, this isn't a time to condemn you or judge you. This is a time to invite you to become one of Kapaun's men and to intentionally bring hope to our families, to our churches, to our workplaces, and to a world, all of which are desperate for this virtue, the virtue of hope.
I think the whole thing about hope and inspiration is so exciting. The Father Kapaun story that really touches my heart was when Father Hotze was talking about the whole suicidal tendencies that men would have in the camp when they just didn't care anymore, and they're ready to quit. And the means they would use is they'd quit picking the lice off their bodies.
The lice were a real problem. Dr. Sidney Essenson told me, or explained to me, he said, a lot of the men up there committed suicide. And he said it was very easy for them to commit suicide. He said all they had to do was to quit picking lice off their body. If they decide to quit picking the lice off their body, he said the first day it was all right, because he said nobody would really notice it. He said that second day, he said you could see that they would start to get a little pale, but he said if they did not pick the lice off by the third day, he said that's when it was too late. He said that third day, he said they would just become ashen. He said they would become gray. And he said when it got to that state, he said there was nothing they could do. He said there was nothing I could do as a doctor. He said those men were going to die.
We had lice like you wouldn't believe. They would get in the seams of your clothes. They'd bite you and everything. I got little white marks on my arms where they'd been bitten. Each one of them lice that you had on you would take a drop of blood almost. So you had to keep them off. It was terrible, them things.
He said time and time again, Father Kapaun would be there to try to instill hope in these men. He said those that were not able to do it themselves, he said those that were suffering from extreme cases of dysentery, or those that were having other medical issues and couldn't do it themselves, he said Father Kapaun would go and do it for them. They said he insisted on the men thinking or realizing that they were going to be able to get out of there alive.
I could talk to a guy and he would be just like all the rest of us. And he'd just say, well, I can't put up with this another day. He'd go to bed that night and he'd be dead the next morning. To say how important the will to live is, I just can't overstate that. And that is where Father Kapaun played the biggest role, because it is he who would engender, under these worst conditions, a will to live among the soldiers.
When the men were in the POW camps, obviously they felt hopeless. I mean, they would never be out. They might as well just die. And I think that's a pretty dire strait to be in. And I think hope has two really big problems. One is despair, and the other one is presumption. And when we look at the presumption that we have in our world, oh, don't worry about it, I'm good enough, I'll be saved, no one has to really worry about being really great. Well, I think Father Kapaun dispelled that just as much as he did the despair. I think that he showed them that, look, we've got to keep fighting, we've got to strive for this higher virtue of hope, and not just allow ourselves to either despair and give up, or sit there and go, you know what, we're gonna be okay. We've got to strive forward and keep moving forward and trust that the salvation that comes with Jesus Christ is there. When we look at the way that he continued to forge ahead, regardless of whether he knew he would die or whether he knew that he would be saved, that we need to forge ahead and continue to strive for a betterment of ourselves and the people around us.
The problem with despair and presumption is they look like opposites, but they're actually the same problem. It's something about me, and it's not about God. So hope sits right in the middle. Hope gives us a real confidence. The traditional symbol of hope is an anchor, which is interesting. It's an anchor. So what does an anchor do? An anchor holds the boat down so that when the storms come, the boat stays. The tide comes in, the tide goes out, and the boat stays. It anchors us down to a real reality. But at the same time, it allows us to look up to what we are inspired to. Because all of us, men, have a desire for greatness. God desires to bring us up out of the mud and the muck we are in and to move mountains, to walk on water, to be great. Hope is what truly gives us the ability to keep our eyes on the prize to be great, and yet to know that my greatness lies not in my own abilities, but in being a man of God.
You know, we can wait till somebody's so broken that it's a long road back, or we can know people so well and know their hearts that we can help them proactively. before it becomes chronic. And I think we have that opportunity daily in our families. We have that in our own marriages. And at times, whether it's laziness, and maybe other times it's hopelessness, other times it's just a total feeling of frustration and anger. But if we could put those emotions aside and think about, well, what would the world look like if I gave that person hope? Father Kapaun example is, it's not very much. Just a positive word here, or a phone call, or a personal note that will be a life changer.
You know, in a condition like that, where the death rate was as high as it was, you'd put the dead outside and they'd freeze in the morning. They'd have these burial details. That was the worst detail of all the details the prisoners had, I always felt. And you would carry these bodies down across the Yalu River to this island. And with entrenching tools, you'd scratch out as much of the ice as you could, enough to throw some over the body. Father would volunteer for all of these burial details, and he would go down carrying bodies down, and then he would strip the bodies, bring the clothes back, wash the clothes, and distribute the clothes to the wounded prisoners or sick prisoners who couldn't take care of themselves.
Father Kapaun, he took care of his fellow man, and just like Christ did. And he used to wash their dirty clothes where they had dysentery and everything. That's one of the dirtiest jobs you can find. And he took care of them. He would wash them up, give them a bath, clean them up, and try to get them back to good health again. And he never complained. He kept right on doing it as long as he could.
You got to imagine this guy with the most scraggly beard you ever saw in your life, having chipped this metal into an eye. He now wore an eye patch over one eye, hair hanging down under a sock cap that was made up of old GI sock or something. And you'd think this kind of a aura walking into would look more like some fierce pirate out of the storybook but here he would walk in, and his persona in this circumstance would just radiate love and made everyone feel good. How he did it, I have no idea. I've never seen anybody who could just capture a group like that.
There was something about him that just said hope, faith, hope. He built up your faith and your hope by just being there.
The virtue of hope, as we've all seen, is a tough virtue because you live in a world that is contrary to everything this virtue calls out in us. We saw the stories of Father Kapaun, where moment after moment in the prison camp he gave hope. I would venture to say if you went to Pilsen, Kansas when he was a child, they'd say he gave hope there as well. I'd say if you went to the times where he was in school, they'd say he was a person of hope. So for us as men today, your challenge is this. Your challenge is to look back at your life. Look back at all the people in your life that have been there. And I want you to find one person that has really given you hope. A person that's maybe led you in a way, encouraged you in a way, and it needs to be a person that you know. It could be a father, a brother, but it's a man that's been in your life who's held you to a standard and given you hope that you could be what God created you to be. And this week the challenge is for you, some point during the time between sessions, to sit down and to write a letter to this person who gave you hope. What we want you to do is to explain to this person why they gave you hope, why they served for you as a person of hope. And I think of my own personal life. Several years ago I turned 40. And one of the things I did during my 40th year is I decided to write a letter to my father. My father is a person that's held me to high standards from a very young age. He's somebody, if you asked me for a hero, I'd say he's a hero. But even more, I'd say he's a person of hope. My father has, through time and time again, shown me that when the world and when situations look hopeless, we can find hope in it. I was reminded as I prayed about this session of a time when my father, I've seen him cry once in my entire life, and it was the day that his father went to see God. And I remember being a young child looking at this man who I idolized. And then after that, watching my father put the pieces of his life together, piece by piece, and saying to us, it's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And as men, we are called to be that to the world. So this week, take some time to write that letter. Make sure you're still praying the prayers each day. And make sure that you know that Father Kapaun is praying for you. I am praying for you. All the men in this group are praying for you. Because we need men who could be hope to a world that oftentimes looks hopeless.